This is the second video for section 2.9 on power indices. In this lecture, I'll be talking about the Banzhaf power index. So in this section, we've been talking about weighted voting systems, and the notation that we use here is that we write the number Q, which stands for quota. That's the number of votes that a motion needs to pass. And then after the colon, we write a bunch of numbers in order, which are the weights of the various voters. So what we saw earlier is that sometimes voters need to work together to get something to happen. So a collection of voters that have enough collective votes to pass a motion, that's called a winning coalition. And a collection of voters that has enough collective votes to prevent a motion from passing, that's called a blocking coalition. So an example here would be where we have our quota is 10, and we have 4 voters, which I'll call A, B, C, and D, with weights 8, 5, 3, and 1 respectively. So let's look at this coalition where A and B work together. That's a winning coalition because when A and B work together, they have 8 plus 5, which is 13 votes. And since 13 is more than the quota, equal to or greater than the quota, that's how many votes you need to pass a motion. So that's a winning coalition if all of those voters vote yes. This coalition where B, C, and D work together, they have 5 plus 3 plus 1, which is 9 votes. I'm just adding up the number of votes corresponding to B, C, and D. Now that's not enough to win because the quota is 10, but if all of those voters vote no, then there's only A remaining with its 8 votes, and that's not enough to pass a motion. So this is a coalition of voters that can work together by all voting no to prevent any motion from passing. Now we also previously learned that there's a little formula for what we call the blocking number. So this number right here is how many votes you need to be a blocking coalition. So Q, that's the quota, that's easy to see. So it's pretty easy to see when something's a winning coalition. For a blocking coalition, we take the total number of votes, subtract the quota, and add 1. That's how many votes or more that you need to be blocking. Now, when we have a winning or a blocking coalition, for the Banzhaf power index, which we're going to get to in a minute, what we need to look at is which voters are critical. So a voter in a winning coalition is critical if when we remove that voter from the coalition, it would no longer be a winning coalition. So we need them in the coalition because if we get rid of them, it's no longer a winning coalition. Similarly, in a blocking coalition, a critical voter is a voter who, if we remove them, would make the coalition no longer blocking. Again, the idea is, well, we need them in the coalition because if we get rid of them, it's no longer a blocking coalition. So let's look at an example to help this make some sense. So we've got our same example as before. Our quota is 10. We've got our 4 voters labeled A, B, C, and D. And let's first understand why is this coalition ABD a winning coalition. To figure that out, all we need to do is add up the total number of votes that this coalition has. A's vote is worth 8, B's vote is worth 5, D's vote is worth 1, so the total of this coalition is 14. The quota is 10, 14 is bigger than or equal to 10, so this is a winning coalition. All right, now which voters are critical to this coalition? So we're starting with our coalition A, B, and D. Let's think about what if we remove A? Well, if we remove A, then our number of votes goes from 14 down to 6 because we're subtracting A's 8 votes, and so all we have is B and D left. That's 5 plus 1, which is 6. That's no longer winning because it's no longer greater than or equal to the quota, so A is critical. If we remove B, similarly, our total number of votes goes from 14 down to 9. We're subtracting B's 5 votes. That's again no longer winning because it's not greater than or equal to 10, so B is critical. What if we remove D? If instead of removing A or B, if instead we remove D, now my total number of votes goes from 14 down to 13. But that's still winning. 13 is still bigger than or equal to 10, so that's still a winning coalition. So D is not critical to this coalition because if we remove D, keeping the other voters, then the coalition is still a winning coalition. So in other words, we didn't really need D in there to make it be a winning coalition. Okay, let's do another example, this time with a blocking coalition. So now we're looking at the coalition B and C. That coalition has 5 plus 3, which is 8 votes. Now for this voting system, what's the blocking number? So the blocking number is T minus Q plus 1. The total is the total number of votes, which is 8 plus 5 plus 3 plus 1. 8 plus 5 plus 3 plus 1, that's 17. 17 minus 10 plus 1, That's 8. So that means that in this voting system, you need to have 8 or more votes to be a blocking coalition. This coalition has exactly 8 votes, so this is blocking. In other words, because 8 is greater than or equal to the blocking number 8, this is a blocking coalition. That's why we say greater than or equal to. If you have that many votes or more, you are a blocking coalition. All right, so which voters are critical to this coalition? So we're starting with the coalition B and C. What happens if we remove B? If we remove B, the only voter that's left is C. C's vote is worth 3. That's not enough to block. No longer blocking. So that means that B, the voter we removed, was critical. If instead we remove C, the only voter that's left is B. B's vote is worth 5. That's, again, not enough to block. No longer blocking. So that means that C was critical. So both of the voters in this coalition are critical. All right, so what's the Banzhaf Power Index? The Banzhaf Power Index looks at every possible coalition, and the fraction of times each voter is critical to a winning or blocking coalition is that voter's Banzhaf Power Index. The more often a voter is a critical voter in a coalition, the higher their power index would be. So how do we find all the coalitions? That's sort of the first thing we need to do to understand the Banzhaf Power Index. So let's look at an example where we have 4 voters. How would we make a list of all possible coalitions? Well, the way we're going to do it is we're going to consider each voter, because for our coalition, the coalition either has that voter or doesn't have that voter. So for example, my coalition might have A, or it might not have A. My coalition, once I decide whether or not it has A, it might have B in it, or it might not have B in it. Might have B, or it might not. And then at the next stage, it might have C, or it might not have C. Again, I'm making one of these tree diagrams like we've seen before. And then finally, I could figure out whether it has D or not D. So not D or D, no D or D, and so on. So I'm going to fill in some of the results here. So for example, let's look at this coalition. So let's see, it doesn't have A, it doesn't have B, it does have C, it doesn't have D, so this coalition is just C all by itself. Let's look at this coalition down here. It has A, it doesn't have B, it has C, it has D, so that coalition is A, C, and D. A couple of notable ones I want to point out. This one right here at the top has nobody in it. That's an empty coalition, so nothing to really consider there, but that would be none of the voters being in that coalition. And this one down here at the bottom, this would be the coalition with everybody in it. It has A, B, C, and D in it. So for each voter, we have 2 choices. That voter is either in the coalition or not in the coalition. So that means if we wanted to count the coalitions, we're just going to have 2 times 2 times 2 a bunch of times. So with 3 voters, there would be 8 coalitions. With 4 voters, the example we just saw, if we worked that all out, we would see 16 coalitions. 5 voters, 32, and so on. So when we have a lot of voters, like for example in the US Electoral College, where we have 51 voters, 50 states plus the District of Columbia, there would be 2 to the 51st power, 2 times 2 times 2, 51 times. That's a pretty big number. That's a 16-digit number. So again, listing all the coalitions and doing this by hand, not really possible, but we could create a computer program to do that for us if we wanted to. Okay, so again, the Banzhaf Power Index is the fraction of times each voter is critical in either a winning or blocking coalition. And just like the Shapley-Shubik Power Index that we learned about in the previous lecture, this index will measure the portion of the total power each voter has. So if we have a dictator who has all the power, the fraction will be 100%. If we have a dummy voter who has no power, the fraction will be 0. Okay, so here's the step-by-step process. Step 1, list all the coalitions. We talked about how to do that a little bit earlier in this video. Step 2, find the critical voters. We also talked about how to do that in a previous video. So for each of our coalitions that happen to be a winning or blocking coalition, we'll think about removing the voters one at a time to see who's critical. And then finally, we'll add it all up. once we've determined which voters are critical to which coalitions, we'll add up the number of times each voter was critical and then create fractions to figure out our power index. Okay, so what I've got here is the result of that tree diagram that we looked at earlier. So here are all the coalitions with 4 voters, and I've also counted up the number of votes that each of those coalitions has. And the reason I'm doing that is to make it easier to figure out which of these coalitions is a winning coalition and which of the coalitions is a blocking coalition. So again, to be a winning coalition, you have to have at least 10 votes. So which of these are winning coalitions? Well, any of these where the number of votes is 10 or more would be a winning coalition. So this one is winning, this one is winning, this one down here, ABC is winning, ABD winning, winning, winning. So we actually only have 6 winning coalitions. And in the next step, for each of those winning coalitions, we'll have to figure out which of the voters was critical. What about blocking coalitions? Well, we also figured out that the blocking number is T minus Q plus 1, which in this example, the total number of votes is 17. Just add up all these numbers, that's 17. Minus the quota of 10, plus 1 is 8. So there will be slightly more blocking coalitions. Any coalition that's a winning coalition will also have to be a blocking coalition. But any other coalition that had 8 or more votes would also fall into the blocking column. So we've got a few more blocking coalitions. In this case, we've got 9 blocking coalitions that we have to consider. So anything that didn't end up being a winning coalition or a blocking coalition, we don't have anything to do. We don't have anything to do with this coalition. We can just, oh, we got one more, I forgot. One more there at the top. I missed one, so we got 10 blocking coalitions. There we go. That one is blocking. But any of these other ones that wasn't winning or blocking, we can just forget about, and there's nothing else we have to do with those. Okay, so what I've done is I've pulled out the 6 winning coalitions that we talked about and the 10 blocking coalitions that we found. Now the next step is going to be to figure out within these coalitions which of the voters are critical. Remember that the way that we do that is we imagine removing one voter at a time and seeing if removing that voter makes the coalition no longer winning, no longer blocking. And again, the way we're going to do that is just by looking at the number of votes that remain. If we take a voter out of a winning coalition and that coalition no longer has 10 votes, then that's going to be a critical voter that we tried to remove. If we look at a blocking coalition and remove that voter and it no longer has 8 votes or more, then removing that voter made that no longer a blocking coalition, so that would be a critical voter that we tried to remove. So it's that same process that we talked about earlier in this video. Okay, so I've done that for you here. And again, if you want to work these out, practice these on your own, go for it. It's a good practice problem, but we figured out that we have these critical voters. Notice that sometimes there are no critical voters, right? Sometimes none of the voters are actually critical to the coalition. And as we saw before, sometimes all of the voters are critical. Really, anything can happen when we're talking about these weighted voting systems. Okay, so the next step would be to count up for each voter, how many times was that voter critical? So for example, if I look at A was critical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times. I've got 12 times that A was a critical voter. And then what else do I have? Let's look at B. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 times that B was a critical voter. And then for C, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 times that C was a critical voter. So A was critical 12 times, B was critical 4 times, C was also critical 4 times. Notice the D was never critical. Okay, so that means that if we take these numbers, the 12 and the 4 and the 4, add those up, 12 plus 4 plus 4, we had 20 total times that anybody was critical. That's the denominator. So 20 total times any voter was critical. That's the number you put on the bottom of your fraction. And then the number that you put on the top of the fraction, you put the number of times that particular voter was critical. So A was critical 12 times out of 20, B was critical 4 times out of 20, C was critical 4 times out of 20, and D was critical 0 times out of 20. And again, this indicates that D is a dummy voter because they have 0 power in this weighted voting system. So let's work through one more example here. So we've got the weighted voting system 15, 12, 8, 4. So my quota is 15. My voters are A, B, and C here. I want to compute the power index. Okay, I've done you the favor of listing all the coalitions for you. Let's figure out how many votes those coalitions have. So number of votes in an empty coalition, that's 0. We just sort of list that for kind of completeness purposes. Doesn't really do anything, but it's a good sort of indication of that that's one of our possibilities. A just by itself is 12 votes, B by itself is 8 votes, C by itself is 4 votes. A and B together is going to be 12 plus 8, which is 20. A and C together is going to be 12 plus 4, which is 16. B and C together is going to be 8 plus 4, which is 12. And A, B, and C all together is 12 plus 8 plus 4, which is 24. Okay, so which of these is a blocking coalition? Well, to figure that out, we need to know what the blocking number is. The blocking number is T minus Q plus 1. The total number of votes minus the quota plus 1. Total number of votes is 24, I just figured that out. Q quota is 15, so 24 minus 15 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So any of these coalitions that has 10 or more votes is a blocking coalition. So no here, yes here, no, no, yes, 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 yes. Now, for any coalition that wasn't blocking, there's nothing to do, right? There can't be a critical voter if the coalition wasn't even blocking in the first place. To figure out the critical voters, we think about, okay, what if I took one of those voters out one at a time? This first coalition just has A in it. So if I take A out, well, nobody's left. So of course it's no longer going to be a blocking coalition. So that means that A is critical. The coalition with A and B, if I remove A, then only B is left. B has 8 votes. That's not enough to block. My blocking number is 10. So that means that A is critical. But if I remove B, there's still 12 votes, A's 12 votes remaining. That is enough to block. So removing B means that B wasn't critical. A and C together, very similar. If I remove A, I only have C left with C's 4 votes, not enough to block. So A is critical. If I remove C but leave A in, then there's still 12 votes remaining. That is enough to block, so that means that C is not critical. What about the coalition with B and C? Well, if I remove B, there's only 4 votes left. That's not enough to block, so B was critical. If instead I remove C, there's only 8 votes left, B's 8 votes, so that means that C is critical. All right, what about this coalition with A, B, and C in it? If I remove A, I still have 12 votes left. That's enough to block, so A is not critical. If I remove B, I have 16 votes left. That's way more than enough to block, so B is not critical. And if I remove C, there's 20 votes left. Tons of votes. That's definitely enough to block, so C is not critical. So in this case, none of the voters is critical because I can remove any one of them and the remaining voters will still have enough power to block. Okay, what about winning coalitions? Well, it's harder to be a winning coalition. You have to have 15 votes to be a winning coalition. So which of my coalitions are winning? The only ones that are the ones where my total number of votes is 15 or more. I've only got 3 of those. A and B, A and C, and B and C. Sorry, A and C. Put the yes in the wrong place. There we go. Yes, right there. A and C have 16 votes. B and C was not a winning coalition because that's only 12. Okay, so no, 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 no. And any of these that was a no, there's nothing to do. There's no way any voter could be critical because it wasn't even a winning coalition to begin with. Okay, now the coalition with A and B. If I remove A, that coalition only has 8 votes remaining. That's not enough to win, so A was critical. If I remove B, then there's only 12 votes remaining. That's not enough to win, so that means that B is critical. What about the coalition with A and C? If I remove A, there's only 4 votes remaining, not even close to enough to win, so A is critical. If instead I remove C, then there's only A's 12 votes remaining. That's not enough to win, so C was also critical. And then finally, this coalition with A, B, and C in it. If we remove A, there's only B and C left. 8 plus 4 is 12. That's not enough to win, so A was critical. If instead I remove B, A and C remaining have 16 votes between them. That is enough to win, so B is not critical. And finally, if instead I remove C, then A and B are left. They together have 20 votes. That is enough to win as well, so C is also not critical. Phew, okay, so we went through all the coalitions. We figured out who was critical to which coalition, and now it's time to count. So A was critical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So A's Banzhaf power index is going to be 6 divided by something. B was critical 1, 2 times. So B's power is going to be 2 divided by something. And C was critical also 2 times, 2 divided by something. All right, what goes on the bottom of the fraction? Well, it's going to be the total number of times anybody was critical. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the bottoms of those fractions are going to be the number 10. And so there's my solution to this problem. Okay, so to wrap things up, one thing to notice from that previous example is that voter B, their vote was worth 8, and C's vote was worth 4. So it looks like B has twice as much weight as voter C, but not any more power. Both B and C ended up with the exact same amount of power. And so that's the usefulness of these power indices, is that they're a way to indicate, well, how much power does this voter really have? Because it looks like they've got their vote is worth twice as much as somebody else's vote. But when you actually look at how they can work together to get things to happen, they're not really any more powerful than any other voter. So it's a good way to end up understanding the dynamics of how voters and parties and whatever these things are representing can work together to get things done.